They didn't simply leave emotional wounds behind, they slowly dismantled the very person who would have sacrificed almost anything for them. Size. When you gave a narcissist your trust, your devotion, your time, and your emotional strength, you became far more than a partner. You became the foundation holding their fragile world together. Pause. What they never want you to realize is this. The moment they chose to destroy the one person who genuinely supported them, they quietly began destroying themselves. They may convince themselves they won because they walked away, replaced you, or crushed your confidence. But beneath that illusion, they crossed a psychological line they can never fully reverse. By tearing down the person who gave them stability without conditions, they activated a series of internal consequences that continue long after the relationship ends. These emotional triggers remain hidden from everyone else, yet they continue working beneath the surface for years. They traded authentic security for a brief rush of ego, and that bargain is one they will never truly recover from. Before we explore how that internal collapse unfolds, pause for a moment and be completely honest with yourself. Remember the exhaustion that never seemed to end, the constant confusion, and the emptiness that settled inside you after every conflict. Ask yourself a difficult question. What parts of myself did I abandon just to keep them satisfied? Think about every warning sign you ignored because you wanted peace. Remember the boundaries you slowly erased to avoid another argument. Your answer matters far more than every affectionate word they once whispered or every cruel insult they later threw at you. That answer is the beginning of your freedom. The image they project as confidence, superiority, or strength is only a carefully maintained illusion. Underneath it sits a deeply frightened person who depends on others to hold together an identity that cannot stand on its own. That impressive mask is far thinner than it appears, and eventually it begins to crack. When a narcissist starts devaluing you, it feels intensely personal. In reality, it is often driven by their own psychological survival. At first, they are drawn to your calm, your loyalty, and your emotional consistency because those are qualities they struggle to create within themselves. Yet over time, those same qualities become unbearable reminders of everything they lack. Your reliability reflects their instability. Your honesty exposes their deception. Your emotional balance highlights the chaos they carry inside. Instead of appreciating those differences, they begin resenting them because needing someone feels like weakness, and weakness threatens the identity they desperately protect. So the story changes. The love they once celebrated suddenly becomes something they describe as controlling. Your support becomes suffocating. Your commitment is reframed as dependency. The warmth that once attracted them is replaced with calculated emotional distance. They stop seeing you as someone to value and begin treating you as an obstacle standing in the way of their inflated self-image. This shift into contempt is never accidental. It serves one purpose: protecting their ego. To justify their behavior, they must completely rewrite the history of your relationship. Now your desire for healthy communication is labeled as being needy. Asking for respect suddenly makes you controlling. Your empathy becomes oversensitivity. Your dependability becomes boring. The very qualities they once admired become the weapons they use against you. This is far more than changing moods. It is a deliberate attempt to dismantle your identity piece by piece. While emotionally disconnecting from you, they continue benefiting from your energy, support, and resources, much like someone draining the very person they secretly resent. They create an impossible imbalance where you carry nearly all the emotional responsibility while they contribute almost nothing, yet somehow convince you that you're the one falling short. Perhaps the most damaging part of this process is the relentless gaslighting. They don't only mistreat you, they gradually train you to question your own reality. By constantly twisting conversations, denying events, and shifting blame, they weaken your confidence in your own memory and judgment. Eventually, you begin wondering whether your worth has truly disappeared, but the opposite is true. Your value never decreased. In fact, it threatened them so deeply that breaking your confidence became the only way they could feel equal to you. A healthy, self-assured version of you cannot be manipulated, and that's exactly what they fear most. They need you doubting yourself. They need you emotionally exhausted. They need you desperately seeking approval from the very person creating your pain. As long as you believe they are the only one capable of healing the wounds they inflicted, they remain at the center of your emotional world. Never forget this. They only appear powerful while you're shrinking yourself. The moment you reclaim your confidence, stand firmly in your truth, and stop seeking permission to value yourself, their carefully constructed illusion begins to collapse. The betrayal cuts so deeply because it was never random. A narcissist rarely destroys someone without purpose. Every insult, every manipulation, and every act of emotional withdrawal is carefully designed to reshape how you see yourself, making it easier for them to maintain control while convincing you that you were always the problem. They don't lash out blindly. Their attacks are remarkably precise, almost as though they know exactly where your emotional defenses are weakest. Think back to the beginning of the relationship, when everything felt magical. During those early months, you probably experienced a level of emotional safety you hadn't known in a long time. You trusted them enough to reveal your childhood pain, your private fears, and the insecurities you rarely shared with anyone else. You believed those conversations were creating genuine closeness. What you didn't realize was that you were unknowingly giving them a detailed guide to the places where you could be hurt the most. When the relationship shifts, they don't rely on random insults or careless criticism. They target the deepest wounds you've already revealed. The very secrets you trusted them to protect become the weapons they use against you. This isn't simply cruelty or uncontrolled anger. It's a calculated strategy designed to weaken your confidence, shake your emotional stability, and make you feel too vulnerable to question their behavior. Living under this kind of emotional precision places your mind and body in a constant state of survival. Your nervous system never gets the opportunity to relax because the person who was supposed to provide comfort has become the greatest source of uncertainty. Instead of feeling safe, you begin anticipating the next emotional attack. Without realizing it, you become hypervigilant. Every facial expression feels significant. Every shift in their voice sounds like a warning. Even long moments of silence begin to feel threatening. You constantly monitor their mood, hoping to prevent the next argument before it begins. Gradually, you become skilled at walking on eggshells. You filter your words, suppress your opinions, hide your emotions, and reshape your personality simply to avoid upsetting them. What feels like keeping the relationship together is actually something much more damaging. Little by little, you're giving away pieces of your own identity. Your interests begin disappearing. Friendships slowly fade. Activities that once brought happiness no longer seem worth the risk of provoking criticism or conflict. You convince yourself that if you become quieter, easier, or more accommodating, the relationship will return to what it once was. But it never does. The expectations constantly change because their objective was never mutual happiness. Their goal is control, and control requires you to remain uncertain, dependent, and emotionally exhausted. No matter how much you sacrifice, the finish line keeps moving farther away. Eventually, this creates one of the most mentally exhausting experiences a person can endure: cognitive dissonance. Your mind becomes trapped between two completely different versions of the same individual. On one side is the person you fell in love with, the attentive partner who made you feel understood, valued, and deeply connected. On the other side is the person standing before you now, cold, dismissive, unpredictable, and emotionally damaging. Your brain desperately searches for a logical explanation because it struggles to accept that both versions could exist within the same person. In that search, you often turn the blame inward. You begin telling yourself that maybe you said the wrong thing, maybe you weren't patient enough, maybe if you changed, tried harder, or loved them better, the caring version would return. You become consumed with finding flaws inside yourself, convinced they hold the answer to saving the relationship. But that answer doesn't exist. This internal conflict isn't proof that you're weak or broken. It's the natural result of trying to understand behavior that doesn't follow healthy emotional logic. You're approaching the relationship with empathy, honesty, and compassion, while they are operating through manipulation, control, and the need to maintain power. The security they created during the beginning wasn't built on a genuine emotional foundation. It was carefully constructed to earn your trust. They needed you to feel completely safe before you revealed the very vulnerabilities they would later exploit. None of this means you failed. You simply became another person caught in a destructive cycle that existed long before you entered their life. They didn't suddenly become someone else. The charming version you first met was simply a mask that eventually became impossible to maintain. The moment you understand that their emotional precision has nothing to do with your flaws and everything to do with their need for control, the fog begins to clear. The confusion starts fading because you finally recognize the truth. You were never the broken one. You were the valuable person they wanted to possess but could never truly appreciate. Now it's time to reclaim the parts of yourself they tried so hard to erase. Perhaps the most disturbing part of the entire experience comes immediately after they've inflicted the damage. While you're left overwhelmed, trying to understand what just happened, they often appear completely unaffected. Sometimes they even seem unusually relaxed, confident, or energized, almost as though they've gained something from your pain. That reaction isn't an illusion. For many narcissists, watching someone emotionally unravel provides a powerful sense of control. Seeing you cry, defend yourself, search for answers, or desperately seek reassurance reinforces the belief that they still have influence over your emotional world. Every visible reaction becomes evidence in their mind that they remain in control, and that temporary feeling of dominance fuels the fragile ego they've spent their entire life trying to protect. In their distorted way of thinking, the ability to shake your emotional world becomes proof that they are stronger than you. Every tear, every moment of confusion, and every desperate attempt to make sense of what happened feeds their fragile ego. Your suffering becomes a source of narcissistic supply, giving them a temporary feeling of power and superiority that quickly fades, forcing them to seek it again. This explains why they can sit across from you only minutes after a devastating argument and behave as though nothing happened. It isn't emotional resilience. It's emotional detachment taken to an unhealthy extreme. By minimizing the conflict or insisting that your reaction is the real issue, they avoid confronting their own behavior. Instead of acknowledging the pain they caused, they shift the focus onto you. When they see your tears, they don't respond with compassion. They often respond with emotional distance or quiet contempt. If they can persuade you that you're being too sensitive, irrational, or unstable, then they never have to admit the damage they've caused. In their mind, everyone wins. They experience the satisfaction of feeling powerful while escaping responsibility for the consequences of their actions. But that feeling never lasts. The emotional rush they receive is temporary, much like a short-lived chemical high. Over time, it takes increasingly cruel behavior to recreate the same sense of control. Every new victory leaves them feeling emptier than the last, quietly creating an internal void they don't know how to fill. What they fail to recognize is that the moment they destroy the relationship, they also damage one of the few sources of stability they truly depended on. You were never just another partner. You became the person who consistently reflected value back to them, even during moments when they hadn't earned it. You offered patience when they created chaos, understanding when they offered confusion, and loyalty when they repeatedly tested it. You provided an emotional consistency that they were unable to generate within themselves. By pushing you away, they lose the mirror that allowed them to temporarily believe they were whole. They often assume they can replace you without consequence. On the surface, it may even appear that they've done exactly that. A new relationship begins quickly. Fresh admiration, endless compliments, and the excitement of someone who hasn't yet seen behind the mask create another temporary high. Yet novelty can never replace genuine connection. They may receive admiration from countless people, but they cannot recreate the history, trust, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment that developed over years with someone who truly cared. Every new relationship becomes another distraction rather than a solution. It's a temporary covering placed over a wound that continues growing beneath the surface. Without your steady emotional presence, an increasing sense of restlessness begins taking hold. The excitement of each new person fades faster than the previous one. They become increasingly impulsive, chasing attention, excitement, and validation in an endless attempt to outrun the emptiness they refuse to acknowledge. It's like trying to fill a leaking container. No matter how much admiration is poured inside, it never remains for long. Deep down, even if they never admit it aloud, they eventually experience a painful realization. By destroying the person who genuinely supported them, they also destroyed one of the few relationships capable of offering authentic emotional stability. With every person they discard, the emptiness grows deeper, leaving them increasingly isolated despite constantly surrounding themselves with new people. While they remain trapped in that exhausting cycle of chasing validation and escaping themselves, something entirely different begins happening inside you. It doesn't begin with confidence. It begins with grief. At first, healing feels nothing like freedom. It feels heavy, lonely, and almost unbearable. You're mourning far more than the end of a relationship. You're grieving the future you imagined, the promises you believed, and the version of them you thought would always exist. You're saying goodbye to the person who once seemed caring, protective, and deeply connected to you. That stage hurts because your heart is finally accepting what your intuition recognized long ago. Slowly, almost without noticing, your habits begin changing. You stop instinctively reaching for your phone every time something happens. You stop rehearsing conversations in your mind, hoping you'll finally discover the perfect words that will make them understand your pain. The silence that once terrified you gradually transforms into something unexpected. It becomes peace. As the emotional fog begins clearing, clarity quietly takes its place. For the first time, you stop explaining away their behavior. You no longer convince yourself they acted that way because of childhood trauma, work stress, or temporary frustration. Instead, you begin recognizing something much more important. It wasn't a collection of isolated mistakes. It was a repeated pattern. You finally see that the manipulation, emotional cruelty, and calculated distance were never random. They served a purpose. They kept you questioning yourself while protecting their ability to maintain control. Accepting that truth can feel devastating because it forces you to confront one of the hardest realizations of all. The person you believed you fell in love with wasn't entirely real. The soulmate you kept trying to rescue was largely a carefully crafted image designed to earn your trust by reflecting your own kindness back to you. Although that realization is painful, it also becomes the foundation of your freedom. You can finally stop trying to save someone who never truly existed in the way you imagined. That is where your power quietly begins returning. Instead of watching them, you begin watching yourself. Instead of chasing their approval, you start rebuilding your own. You begin listening once again to the quiet inner voice you ignored for months or perhaps years, while sacrificing your own peace simply to keep theirs intact. From that moment forward, your healing no longer depends on their behavior. It begins with choosing yourself, one honest decision at a time. The instincts you spent so long ignoring eventually become impossible to silence. That quiet voice inside you, the one that warned something wasn't right from the very beginning, returns with undeniable clarity. You finally understand that your boundaries were never unreasonable, selfish, or excessive. They were the safeguards protecting your emotional well-being. Instead of asking someone else for permission to treat you with dignity, you begin deciding what behavior you will never accept again. Something powerful happens in that moment. The energy that was once consumed by analyzing every text, predicting every mood, and carefully avoiding conflict begins flowing back into your own life. Rather than trying to repair someone who has no desire to change, you start rebuilding the relationship that mattered most all along, the relationship with yourself. Through every moment of pain, confusion, and disappointment, you were the one person who never truly left. This transformation is exactly what the narcissist never anticipated. Their entire strategy depended on the belief that you would always remain emotionally available, forever hoping for another small moment of affection or another promise that things would finally be different. They expected the confusion to keep you trapped indefinitely. Instead, they underestimated what happens when someone reaches the limit of what they can endure. You aren't simply recovering from the relationship. You're becoming someone who sees manipulation with remarkable clarity. The emotional awareness you've gained makes their old tactics far easier to recognize. What once felt powerful now appears predictable, repetitive, and deeply insecure. The day you stop wishing for the person they pretended to be and fully accept the person they repeatedly showed themselves to be is the day their control over you finally disappears. You aren't just walking away from an unhealthy relationship. You're returning to yourself, and this time, you refuse to leave your own needs behind. Eventually, the silence often ends with an unexpected message. It may arrive as a casual question, a nostalgic memory, a simple, "I've been thinking about you," or even an apology that sounds almost identical to the one you waited years to hear. But appearances can be deceptive. More often than not, this isn't evidence of meaningful growth or genuine accountability. It's a test. They want to know whether they still have access to your emotional energy. They're checking whether the door they once walked through so easily remains unlocked. They're not reaching out because they've suddenly discovered empathy. Frequently, they're reaching out because another source of validation has faded, and they want to know whether you will still respond. To someone driven by the need for control, even anger or rejection can feel rewarding because it proves they still occupy space in your emotional world. Any reaction confirms that they can still influence your thoughts and feelings. That's why allowing them back without consistent, long-term evidence of real personal change, which is uncommon, rarely leads to a different outcome. You don't return to the beginning, you return to the same cycle, only faster and more damaging. The idealization phase becomes shorter because they no longer need to earn your trust. The devaluation begins sooner because your willingness to return is often interpreted not as compassion, but as proof that you'll tolerate behavior others would reject. Their respect decreases while their confidence in controlling the relationship grows. When the cycle ends again, the emotional damage is frequently even greater than before. Opening that door isn't giving them another opportunity to become healthier. It's often giving them another opportunity to repeat the same pattern with even fewer restraints. Yet the greatest tragedy doesn't belong to you. It belongs to them.
While you're slowly rebuilding your confidence, learning healthier boundaries, and discovering what genuine love should feel like, they remain trapped in a life built on emotional shallowness. Every time they discard someone capable of authentic connection, they move one step farther away from experiencing that kind of relationship themselves. They become increasingly dependent on external validation, endlessly pursuing the excitement of new attention, new admiration, and new romantic possibilities. But because vulnerability feels threatening and accountability feels unbearable, those relationships rarely develop genuine depth. They continue collecting admiration while struggling to experience true intimacy. From the outside, their life may appear exciting, successful, or even enviable. Social media may display confidence, popularity, and endless opportunities. Yet appearances often hide profound emotional emptiness. Surrounded by people, they remain disconnected from the kind of trust and security that create lasting relationships. The greatest irony is that the victory they believed they achieved slowly becomes their prison. They spend their lives searching for identity through the approval of strangers, constantly performing, constantly adapting, and constantly fearing that someone will eventually see beyond the carefully constructed mask. Relationship after relationship ends the same way, leaving broken trust, abandoned connections, and growing loneliness because they repeatedly destroy the very people who were willing to love them sincerely. Your story moves in the opposite direction. What once felt like the greatest loss of your life becomes the turning point that allows you to stop abandoning yourself. while they continue chasing validation that never satisfies them. You're building something real. Relationships grounded in honesty, healthy boundaries, emotional safety, and self-respect. In the end, you didn't lose the person who was meant for you. You escaped someone who survived by draining the life from others. And by choosing yourself, you gained something they may spend a lifetime searching for, but never truly experience: peace.